Kerry.
Thanks, Chairman, and good afternoon again, Mr. Neary. I'm sticking to the list now, Chairman, but it's very similar to the question you just asked, so at the risk of being repetitive, as a regular at the time, what was your opinion of the usefulness of the simulation exercise? And what outcome came as a result?
I think the idea behind them is very good. I think.
But specific to the crisis that came, I know that the idea of being prudent about the future is good, but in the light of what came, was it worthwhile? Was it useful? Was it valid? Or was it futile with hindsight?
No, I think some of the outcomes from the crisis may have resulted in preparations being made that would have had to be made anyway later on as the actual crisis unfolded, and as the central bank was wanting to make sure that arrangements in place for the emergency liquidity and things like that. So that would have been done anyway, and I think maybe the crisis exercise identified some of that work, and it was done maybe a bit earlier than otherwise. But there was no real comparison between the crisis that emerged and the deterioration in the liquidity position that occurred in the system and the kind of an exercise that we carried out.
So, in effect, it wasn't very useful.
In the particular case, there was no direct link, but I wouldn't like to just disregard the exercise as being useless.
Who was responsible for creating and updating the stress test scenarios?
The Financial Stability Department in the central bank had ownership of that procedure.
And how would you rate them in terms of the effectiveness for predicting the bank failures?
Well, I think this goes back to what we were talking about this morning. In the great scheme of things, it would have been good if the outputs from the Financial Stability Committee and the Financial Stability Report had identified, issues that should be followed up and probabilities of things going to happen, etc. I mean, for example, like the IMF were, inclined to give a view, I think, in their assessments, whereas the Financial Stability Report carefully set out what to solve the risks, but never really kind of said, well, look, this risk is very likely to happen if we don't do something about it. So in that sense, I suppose the stress tests and the way they fed into the Financial Stability Reports probably failed to deliver their full potential.
And would the lack of what we were talking about this morning, the enforcement on the prudential side, have contributed to that?
I suppose, you have to take it, I think, in its entirety. I mean...
Well, I know that we all know the entire situation, so we're kind of going through, as tedious as it is for everybody, the individual component parts. So would the fact that the practice was not to enforce the prudential regulation issues, would that have contributed to the ineffective nature of the stress testing?
Well, I suppose, and I don't want to get into any kind of nitpicking either, but let's not assume, for the sake of our discussion, that there was a number of issues that we would like to have sanctioned but didn't sanction, that there was a list that we're saying, here's my list, but unfortunately because of resources I can't do it. I mean, there may or may not have been issues that we wanted to pursue, but if there were issues, and if, say, the issues related to lack of control and oversight over, say, the management of the portfolio, and sanctions weren't taken, and that bad behaviour continued, well then of course I agree with what you're suggesting, that it might have had a bearing on it.
Did the criteria for these tests pre and post crisis change a lot?
I don't know what happened since the crisis. I don't know how they factored them in.
So you don't know?
I wouldn't have any idea.
Okay. Just on the night of the guarantee, when you were brought in, would you describe with hindsight your position as somebody who promoted the idea of a blanket guarantee?
No, I wouldn't. Both the chairman and myself were very careful to express our concerns, but I mean, I wouldn't have considered that, you know, we'd be volunteering advice unless we were asked for it, and we were asked a view about the scenarios I described, and we did indicate that the guarantee of all the institutions was less risky, in our view, than the one involving the nationalisation and the guarantee, because of the risk it might be misinterpreted by the market the following morning.
So when the Minister asked the regulator, did you agree with the EIB Bank of Ireland view that 2 institutions needed to be nationalised and the rest guaranteed? You disagreed with that, is that?
I don't remember him asking. I don't remember the option of 2 institutions being put.
Yeah, it's on page 104, volume 2 there. You might like to take a look at it or get it up on the screen. Can we get this up on the screen? This one. So we can see these minutes here, and you'll see PN, presumably yourself, and JR. And it says, well, obviously there's abbreviations, yeah. But what it seems to say is the Minister asked the financial regulator, did they agree with the EIB Bank of Ireland that 2 need to be nationalised first? FR, PN, presumably yourself, in brackets, did not agree.
Well, I don't agree with what's stated in those minutes, because we were asked about a guarantee for one. One to be nationalised and guaranteed for the rest, or all to be guaranteed. So I do not agree with what's stated there.
Yeah, so the minute is wrong as far as you're concerned.
That's not. Yeah, that's in conflict with.
Sorry, Dermot Lee, somebody was inside here had some questions about those minutes as well. So
very good. Oh yeah, but it's only just to get his view. I'm not judging one way or another. Yeah.
No.
So you think
that's not as I recollect it.
They're questionable. Okay. And which institution was that, or can we say? Which one?
Anglo.
Oh, Anglo. Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's fine. What weighting would you have applied when you were asked to give your various views? Presumably, was it the Minister that was asking you, or the Taoiseach, or?
No, there was a kind of general discussion around the table. I can't visualise any direct line of questioning. There was a general discussion. Everybody was saying what they had to say. But it could have been the Minister, could have been the Taoiseach, it could have been somebody else. Say, well, what's the regulator think looking across the table? It could have been the financial officials that asked the question. But it came into the discussion.
And there was various suggestions, presumably going around the table, was there, in terms of?
At the first meet, there was two sessions, right? And the very first session, that we weren't in there for a long time. I'd say it was an hour would be the max that we were in the first session, and that was kind of discussing the solvency, and they were talking in general about what the options were that could be used, and a variety of options that were available were used, but no conclusion whatsoever was reached in the first session. That's when we came back in that the situation seemed to have crystallised down to this choice, and we had kind of tracked.
Were you in the room for want of a better expression, eureka moment, where they said, "Yeah, okay, let's go with an overall guarantee for everybody"?
A consensus emerged in the room, but.
Was that consensus one that you supported?
In the end, that consensus was that the consensus was seeming to favour a guarantee. Now,
and on the night in question,
but it's important just on this one, Senator, that there wasn't a eureka point when I was in the room that said, "Okay, lads, that's it, decide it." Right? That consensus emerged. Now, the chairman and I, at that stage, the meeting. Was this, our presence was there, because there was another meeting seemingly going to go ahead, and I think, with hindsight, what I've learned, since, that they met with the banks again. So the chairman and I left the meeting at that stage, and we went to a room. So the eureka moment, while there was a consensus, I didn't see a decision.
You weren't there for it. I just have two very, and I'll be as quick as I can. Professor Honohan, in his own personal view, advocated a position where really we should have pushed for more time, ELA should have been provided, we should have got to the weekend, and, for want of a better expression, called the EU's bluff, and maybe they would have involved themselves in risk sharing. Do you feel that was a viable option? Or was the solvency situation, considering outflows, such that you were out of time, or was there time to do that? And one more after this, and I'm finished.
Based on my understanding, Senator, I think you could have nursed Anglo to the weekend, because as far as I know, and some of this that was with hindsight, so you know, it's an evaluation-based information that I've learned since, that Anglo were in a position because of ELA or whatever from the governor of the central bank to survive on the Monday, they survived on the Monday, and then there was arrangements being negotiated with the banks to provide liquidity to get them to the weekend, right?
Yeah.
So I suppose
you think you could have done that?
Could have. I presume that could have happened, right? That was an option, and you could put the infrastructure in place.
Yeah, but in terms of your advice on outflows,
One final question.
I have the last one.
Ask it, please.
Yeah. Well, perhaps somebody else will come back to this line, but this is another question that I want to ask. We're having difficulty in our questioning over the period of time, getting to the bottom of the origin and source of the no bank should fail consensus that everybody seems to know, but nobody seems to remember who said it. Do you have any recollection or knowledge that you're able to underpin for us to say, well, it was the ECB, it was Brian Cowan, who was it that came up with the consensus that no bank should fail, that everybody seems to know about, but nobody is prepared to underpin?
Mr. Neary.
Yeah, I think I can home in on one particular discussion that was held at the authority, and I think it was around the 16th of September. And the authority, a special meeting of the authority to consider, you know, just to take stock of the situation. And there had been developments in relation to one of the smaller entities, and the authority had a general discussion about the options available if that particular institution were to experience liquidity difficulties. Because at that time, that followed on that famous declaration by that rating agency, which was subsequently corrected, that there was difficulties with the institution. And the authority's consensus at that particular time was in favour of a nationalisation of that entity. Certainly, as we move closer, there was this sense seemed to develop that, you know, nationalisation, you know, was less of an option, and that the guarantee was more of an option, because almost every institution was heading into extremely difficult circumstances. So while at one stage it was thought, well, we only have one maybe that's going to have this liquidity problem, and we can deal with that separately. As time moved on, the challenge was getting bigger. So at some stage between the 16th of September and the night of the guarantee,
Interrupting the man, he's answering the question. Continue, please.
Conferring with the chairman. Continue.
No.
I considered it, so it wasn't. It just popped in there like everyone else.
He's answering the question. Will you let him
but I'm
continue,
listening.
please, and we get him to conclude?
I'm trying to get the answer.
I just tried to
Just finish the story, please, Mr. Neary.
I just tried to trace the evolution, of this chairman. And I think as we kind of got closer to the 30th or the 29th of September, there seems to be this kind of unspoken consensus emerging that maybe you know, a one bank guarantee solution or one bank nationalisation solution is not the preferred option anymore. That is a bigger issue than that.
Okay.
Now,
Thank you.
I just one other thing that's just come into my head was that there was a kind of a gesture, if you like, in that direction when the deposit guarantee scheme was strengthened. That was around the 18th, I think, or 19th of September, if my memory serves me right, because in the text announcing that, the minister had made some statement that, you know, the government would support, I don't have exactly the text, but around that time, when the deposit guarantee was being strengthened, there was an indication that depositors' funds would be secure or whatever. I can't remember exactly the phrase. So that may have been the factor in getting people thinking along those lines, and maybe became a factor in making that solution more acceptable. But it's a speculative point, Chairman.
And I'd maybe draw a line under there, because you're moving on to speculation rather than informed opinion. Mr. Deputy McGrath.